Hello, this is the third module in a video series about using the concepts from the Baldrige Improvement Model for department and unit improvement. One of my favorite all-time movies is Ghostbusters. It always surprises me to see that Ghostbusters was released in 1984, which is over 36 years ago. I won't tell you how old I was when the movie came out, but I will say I was not old enough to have watched it in a theater. In short, if you haven't seen it, the four Ghostbusters shown here, they open a business in New York City exterminating ghosts. At one point, their ghost busting services become such a high demand that they're overwhelmed with the number of calls they receive and they must start making choices about who they can serve and who they can't serve. In the same way, we all have a limited amount of time and resources to use in supporting the achievement of our mission. So this leads to difficult decisions about who we are going to serve and who we won't serve. Module 3 is all about deciding who we will serve and then seeking to understand exactly what they need and figuring out how we will meet those needs. So the very first question your unit needs to answer is, who do we serve? Now, all units serve multiple stakeholders, but one helpful way to think about who you serve is to consider two additional questions. The first is about the location of the customer. Internal customers are located within your organization. So for example, if I worked in a car factory and my job was making steering wheels, the person next in the line who I handed the finished steering wheel to, who then maybe installs it into the car, that's an internal customer because they're working inside the company and they're receiving the product that I hand off to them. Of course, eventually, that steering wheel is used by a person who drives the car, and that would be an external customer. The second question to consider is the proximity to the customer. For example, the person who drives the car is a direct customer because they're using the steering wheel at the time to drive the car. On the other hand, say passengers who ride in that person's car when they're maybe using it for Uber, they'd be indirect customers because they benefit from having an effective, well-designed steering wheel, even though they're not using it themselves. So for example, some common customers that many units say they would serve include students. They would be external direct customers. Parents would be external indirect customers. Other instructors, if you think about the handoff process from a student in one course in a series to the next course, would be internal direct customers. And of course, people in the state of Iowa, we'd think of them as external indirect customers, and that our mission as a university is to serve the needs of the people of the state. Now, as you think about your list of customers, you don't have to list absolutely everyone with whom you interact, and you want to keep the list as manageable as possible, but you do want to recognize that you do serve various customers with sometimes competing needs. Now, sometimes units will object to the idea of students as customers. I think a big part of this objection comes from the old notion that the customer is always right. I would argue that students are customers because they have a choice of where they attend school, and the competition for students has never been as fierce as it is now, and it's likely to continue to get more and more competitive in the next few years. However, this idea that the customer is always right has to be balanced with the recognition that we also serve future employers, and we also serve the people of Iowa, and they would not be well served by poorly prepared teachers or poorly prepared students. So I would say that while students are customers, they're not the only customers, and we have to recognize our responsibility to all customer groups when considering how to design and implement programs and services. Another important concept in the Baldrige model is the idea of segmentation. In terms of the relevance of this module, segments are the subgroups of your customers. So for example, your unit might serve traditional age students and non-traditional age students. So grouping the students into these two segments is a logical grouping as the needs and preferences of these segments varies. Say, for example, one group might prefer daytime classes and the other might prefer evening or weekend classes. Again, it's possible to get carried away by identifying every possible segment. This is not what we're trying to do here, but trying to think about how you keep this manageable at the same time thinking about the value in segmenting your customers to be more effective at understanding and meeting your customers' needs. Now, each of the customers you identified, they have specific needs that your program and services are intended to meet. It can be very helpful to identify and write down those needs. Now, later in this module, I'll talk about gathering data from students and other customers about their needs, but for this activity, just rely on whatever data you have or just your own experience and interaction with these groups. But first, let me pause for a moment and talk about this question. What is a need? From the simplest behavioral perspective, a need is something that drives action. For example, a need for food drives me to pick up the phone and order a sandwich. Of course, needs get much more complex than just hunger, and sometimes needs can be competing. So for example, I might have a need to finish my taxes to avoid paying a penalty, but I might also need to go to bed because I'm tired and I have a big meeting at work the next day. Another example would be the conflict between a need for an affordable product and the need for a high quality product. So I might need the best education money can buy, for example, but I may not be able to afford to pay for that kind of education, and therefore I might not be able to have either of those needs met, or I might have to find some ways to make some compromises between those two needs. I might also have needs that I have difficulty expressing, or I may even have needs I don't recognize in myself as needs, such as a need for social interaction or for community support, or some kind of feature or program or service that I don't recognize I need right away. Some examples of common needs would be the need to earn a degree or license to allow a student to pursue a particular field of employment. Another example of a need would be a need for students to access high-quality learning materials, high-quality instruction, academic support. Examples of needs for other customers might be access to research materials or research results that can be used to inform educational practices. And of course, the people in the state of Iowa need a highly prepared and highly qualified workforce. Now, these are just some examples. I'm sure your unit will think of additional needs for students and customers that you serve. Now, in the activity for this module, I'll ask you to put all of this together, listing the customers and students your unit serves, whether they're internal, external, or direct or indirect, to describe their needs, their expectations, and the output that your unit produces that meets those needs and expectations. I haven't mentioned expectations yet. These are like needs, but they have to do more with satisfaction and quality expectations of those groups. So don't worry too much about the distinction, but just give yourselves a little space to think about not only what the student needs, but also the qualities and elements that will help them be satisfied along the way. And outputs, these are the things that your unit produces that's designed to meet a need. So here's a couple examples. You can see in bold here, if a student needs a degree or license, the output, of course, then is degrees or licenses. So this is the idea of aligning student and customer needs with the output produced by your unit, and that's this next section. Now, understanding students and other customers' needs is only one portion of the process. The next step is to reflect on your unit's programs and services to consider the extent to which they're aligned with students and other customers' needs. So for example, there's a store here in town where I frequently shop. Now, every few months, they run a special rebate program where you have to collect a whole bunch of paperwork and mail off the paperwork, and then wait around 6 to 10 weeks and eventually get a store credit voucher in the mail. Now, this is a process that's designed to meet the needs of the business, not the needs of the customer. Now, obviously, customers would have their needs better met if the rebate program were automatic, say by being part of a member rewards program, or by, say, simply discounting the prices in the store rather than requiring the mail-in process. But the mail-in process must have some ease of implementation or some cost advantage for the store, which is why they keep using it. Now, of course, there's limits on what we can put in place given constraints of time and other resources, but the point of this exercise is to think first about the needs you're going to meet and how your unit will meet those needs by taking a student and customer perspective, rather than thinking about first what would be most convenient or easiest to implement for your unit. So one strategy for aligning programs and services to students and other customers is to use a table like this. Enter the customers you identified earlier along with their needs and expectations, and then describe how your unit currently meets those needs. What are the programs or services that you provide that meet those needs? And then do the same thing with expectations. Based on what you determine that were their expectations, how are you meeting those expectations? And finally, and I'll talk about this more in a few minutes, how do you know if you're meeting needs and expectations? What data do you have that you're collecting to answer whether or not you're meeting those needs and expectations for your customers and students? One way you might know about whether you're meeting students and other customers' needs and expectations is if you're receiving complaints. I think we generally all have an idea of what a complaint is. It's a statement by a student or some other customer that a situation is unsatisfactory or unacceptable. Accreditors may have a special definition they use regarding complaints. So if your unit has specialized accreditation, it's important to pay attention to what the accreditor says about complaints. There's also different types of complaints that we might have to consider at different levels of importance. For example, here's 2 complaints. My fries at lunch were a bit salty. Versus, instead of gasoline, your gas station pumped water into my gas tank and ruined my engine. Now, if you run a restaurant, you probably might think it's helpful to know if you're serving fries that are too salty. However, your liability for that is much more limited in comparison to a gas station ruining an engine on, just hypothetically here, a 2018 Toyota Highlander. So when you're thinking about your unit's approach to receiving and acting on complaints, you should be thinking about this issue of different levels of complaints and how that informs your approach. There's that A again from Adley showing up again here, if you've watched earlier videos. Now, the first thing you need to do is to identify how you receive complaints. Do you have an approach for receiving complaints? You might also consider how you search for complaints. Some students, customers don't like to complain, but they may still have complaints that should be addressed if you have a way to identify those complaints. Shown here is an example from the College of Education's approach for receiving complaints. I show this not as an exemplar, but for you to think about how your approach might align with the college's approach. In the college, the first step in addressing a complaint is for the person with the complaint to address it with the person with whom they have a complaint. There's also alternative complaint options, which are particularly important for complaints related to sexual harassment or sexual violence. You can see on the right there. If the complaint is not resolved, that complaint should be then escalated to the department chairperson or the unit head. And if that person is unable to resolve the complaint, then it routes to the associate dean or the associate dean for faculty or the College of Education's human resource officer. And if that person is not able to resolve the complaint, then a complaint can be escalated again, this time to the university ombudsperson or to the dean of the College of Education. Now, one important concept for your approach to complaints is the extent to which you want to be able to engage in service recovery. Service recovery is about taking an angry, dissatisfied student or customer and turning them into a loyal, happy student or customer. So, for example, we recently ordered a pizza from a local pizza chain. It took the pizza place at least twice as long as we had expected for them to deliver the pizza. We filed no formal complaints or anything like that, but a few days later we received a coupon in the mail for a free pizza from this pizza chain, encouraging us to give them another chance. Having a robust complaint collection and response process will allow your unit to take these sorts of actions with your students and other customers. And this is really important because it's much easier to solve a problem with a current student or a current customer than it is to recruit a new student or a new customer. Ideally, your goal is to prevent future complaints. You can only do this if you have an approach for collecting complaints that systematically collects them and helps you make changes to your unit so that the issues don't arise again. For example, the gas station where my parents bought this water-filled gas, they could replace their storage tanks so water doesn't seep into the tanks again. Your unit should proactively prepare for service recovery as well in areas where complaints could be expected, and unit employees should be empowered to engage in service recovery when such issues arise, instead of waiting for a supervisor or someone else to approve action. Your unit should review complaints that are received and then improve systems and approaches to ensure the same complaints don't arise again in the future. The goal is to reduce the number of complaints your unit receives by addressing problems proactively. This takes us to the last section of this module, which is about collecting and using information from students and other customers to inform action. When you're collecting information from students and other customers, you want to ensure that you are receiving honest feedback. And it does you no good if people are just telling you what they think you want to hear. You should also consider the listening methods that you use that allow for immediate feedback. Some feedback that comes to you is too slow, it takes too long to get to you. It's worthless if you're not able to act on it. Now, not every listening method has to provide immediate feedback, of course, but this should be something you think about how you get some of those immediate, actionable feedback from your customers and students. It's helpful to make your data collection process systematic, and it helps to write it down and include a specific data collection schedule, and then check back periodically to make sure you haven't forgotten anything. And finally, you should write out how you will collect and share information from the listening methods to inform action. Will you, for example, store information on a shared website, on a series of Word documents, or in a database? And will you share results at meetings, through a newsletter, through staff meetings? Having information is of no use, of course, if you don't make use of it. Here's a simple template you can use to create your listening and sharing plan. This first row is completed as an example. So for each customer or student group, you should identify the approaches used for listening. For example, we might have, for employees of alumni, we might list our employer advisory board, an annual survey of employees of alumni. Feedback from employers at the career fair might be another example. Now, since the advisory board and survey are only implemented annually, they would not be considered immediate feedback. However, if we were able to collect feedback from employers at the career fair, this could be considered immediate feedback if their comments are about the career fair, and that we'd be able to act on that in the moment and change the career fair to better suit their needs. Results are going to be shared with the leadership team. There's a PDF, say, of the survey that's shared with employees, and there's a wrap-up meeting held at the conclusion of each career fair to discuss feedback and improvements for the next career fair. So that's it for Module 3. Understanding your students and other customers is critical to your success. Hopefully this module will help you think about how you listen to students and other customers and how you convert that into program and service planning, how you use that to reduce complaints, and how you use that to act in response to feedback. and there are 4 associated activities shown with this module. Thank you for listening.